Honourable Senators, if I can have your attention, please. We will now that we have the quorum, I'll declare the meeting in session. And I want to take this opportunity to welcome the witnesses, and we'll have a formal introduction a little bit later. And I welcome you to this meeting of the Standing Senate Committee on Agriculture and Forestry. My name is Percy Mockler, Senator from New Brunswick and Chair of the committee. And at this point, I would like to ask all senators to introduce themselves for the witnesses. Madame, please.
Merci. I'm Panna Merchant, and I'm from Saskatchewan.
Fernand Robichaud, Saint-Louis de Kent.
Fernand Robichaud, Saint-Louis de Kent, New Brunswick.
Harwich, Ontario.
Catherine Colbeck, Prince Edward Island.
Don Flett, I'm from Manitoba.
Joanne Dew from Manitoba. Nikki Eaton, Ontario.
Mike Duffy, Prince Edward Island.
Ghislain Maltais, Québec.
Ghislain Maltais, Québec. Michel Rivard, Les Laurentides, Québec.
Terry Mercer from Nova Scotia.
Thank you, Senators. Comme vous le savez,
as you know, the Senate Committee has an order of reference, and it is that the Standing Senate Committee on Agriculture and Forestry be authorized to examine and report on research and innovation efforts in the agricultural sector. In particular, the committee shall be authorized to examine new markets domestically and internationally.
As part of our order of reference, improving food diversity and security. The committee witnesses is continuing its study on research and innovation efforts in the agricultural sector. And today we will have, honorable senators, two panels. And the first panel, we will be focusing on nanotechnology and the challenges related to applied research in agriculture with nanotechnology. The focus of our second panel will be market opportunities for renewable energy and their impact on innovation of agriculture in agriculture. Honorable Senators, we do have two witnesses, and before introducing the two witnesses officially, I want to take this opportunity to say thank you to the witnesses for accepting our invitation and to share with us your opinions, recommendations, and also your vision of the next step in agriculture. So we do have Madame Maria de Rosa, Professeur agréé chimie.
Associate Professor in Chemistry, Carleton University.
We also have Dr. Suresh Neethirajan. Am I, Doctor, pronouncing your name sufficiently well? Thank you. Who is in Bio-Nano Lab, the University of Guelph. And I would now invite the witnesses to make their presentation, and I have been informed by the clerk, Mr. Pittman, that Dr. Neethirajan will make the first presentation to be followed by Dr. De Rosa. So, Dr. Neethirajan, la parole est à vous, and please make your presentation.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, and the honorable members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before the Standing Committee. My name is Suresh Neethirajan, and I am an assistant professor at the University of Guelph. I am a Canadian who did his studies at Manitoba and received nanotechnology training at Oxford University, England. Prior to my current position, I have worked as a scientist at the National Agriculture and Food Research Organization at Tsukuba in Japan, and also as a research engineer at the Oak Ridge National Laboratory of the Department of Energy of the United States. Today is World Food Day, and it is timely to talk about the applications and the implications of nanotechnology in Canadian agriculture. The benefits of nanotechnologies in agriculture over conventional technologies are undeniably tremendous. The Bio-Nano Lab at the University of Guelph is focused on studying the nanoscale aspects of biological systems and thereby create applications for agricultural systems. The Bio-Nano Lab is working from the curiosity-driven research, and then it moved towards application-driven research in producing novel solutions for agricultural and food industries. Novel, smart, micro-nano enhanced surfaces for prevention and control of biofouling in the food industries, nanoparticle-enabled grain quality monitoring sensors, and novel microfluidic-based disease diagnostic system are few of the research outputs from the Bio-Nano Lab. I would like to focus on three major challenges today, namely the government funding, risk governance, and the public acceptance of nanotechnology as the challenges related to applied research in agriculture. While Canada has fewer nanotechnology researchers than larger countries such as the United States and China, we are more efficient in terms of number of scientific articles published per researcher. The cancellation of funding programs such as Research Tools and Instruments program and the major resources support by NSERC at the federal level and the Ontario Research Fund Research Excellence program at the provincial level are serious blows, as it will significantly stall the research program progress in the nanotechnology domain and will impede the capacity to innovate. This is the time to move forward by providing opportunities to encourage researchers to maintain the momentum. Research takes longer time, and to move from an idea to an innovation to a product requires sustained funding. Uncertainty in intellectual property rights and regulation is another challenge. Continued investment in basic and applied research from the government is essential. Some of our industrial collaborators are willing to provide in-kind contribution, but no cash contribution towards supporting our projects. Moreover, big industries, especially in the agriculture and food sector, are not willing to openly collaborate if they see the word nano in the project proposal, mainly due to possible reputation risks. We have obtained a United States patent for a nanoparticle sensor for food quality monitoring. The challenge we face is to move this invention into a realizable commercial product. From my perspective, most Canadian industries are predominantly supporting technology push rather than market pull innovation. In reality, Canadian farmers are just relying on temperature-based thermocouple cable to monitor the grain quality. This is a very poor quality management strategy because a grain kernel is a poor conductor of temperature. Our sensing system uses carbon dioxide, odor volatile molecules, and other related biomarkers to efficiently monitor the quality of the stored grain system, which is built based on nanoparticles and nanomaterials. Although there is a huge market demand for this nanoparticle-based quality monitoring system, the Canadian business environment seems to be more technology-driven. One should remind and acknowledge that there are deficiencies in the current nanotechnology-related regulations, and a huge knowledge gap exists in terms of the public awareness and information on the impact of nanotechnology on agriculture and food packaging. It would be advisable for the government and for the regulatory body to take a proactive approach to avoid any unpredictable health hazard by creating suitable regulations specific to nano products. These guidelines are indeed essential as they will aid in sustaining the growth of agriculture industry in the longer term and will help to avoid any health hazards. They will also change and influence the tangent of nanotechnology research towards safety and toxicology. Industries will be compelled to use clear labeling for ingredients present in the form of nanoparticles. Agricultural chemical companies and food manufacturing industries might be obligated to conduct risk assessment before releasing the product into the market. As such, there are no standard protocols for testing the toxicology effects of nanomaterials. Further research into human exposure to nanomaterials and their toxicology and biokinetics will add more challenges to the research domain. Although the government regulations sound like contradictions to the nanotechnology-based innovation, it will rather be a driving force for promoting nanotechnology in the field of agriculture. There is also no consensus among the nanotechnology researchers regarding the definition of the term nano, and more particularly the size as well. Although 1 to 200 nanometer range is commonly accepted as a nanoparticle, 150 nanometer and above may not have as serious implications in terms of health risks. The definitions and the size range between 1 to 100 nanometer put forward by the National Nanotechnology Initiative of United States is predominantly based on the non-food, non-agricultural materials of nanoscience. Absence and lack of clear, formal, globally accepted definition about the term nano and the legally accepted size range for nano would cause a political and technical challenge in terms of implementing the new government regulations. Along with voluntary disclosure mandate from the industries, the regulatory agency of the government could possibly put forward a platform or a web source to inform the public about the list of products that are commercially available in the Canadian market that are made using nanotechnology. Creating public awareness and thereby acceptance is the key for successful nano-based agri-food research products. The new legislation should be explicit with specific provisions for various nanomaterials. The regulations could release a list of authorized substances that could be used as components of intelligent, smart, and active packaging or in the food contact surfaces for anti-fouling applications. A nanotechnology network or a hub specific for agriculture, namely networks of centers of excellence, or the Nanotechnology Center for Agri-Food Innovation should be established in Canada, which might act as a sustainable Canadian infrastructure for accelerating agricultural nanotechnology. Creation of such a nano hub for research and development will advance partnership between universities, companies, and government research labs. For creating public awareness, government can possibly create pre-competitive nanotechnology education platforms which can provide a foundation for innovation. Public participation in all stages of the research and innovation process is essential for addressing the societal dimensions of the nanotechnology adoption. Education and research go hand in hand. I believe University of Guelph and University of Waterloo are the only two institutions that offer nano-specific programs such as BSc in Nanoscience and BSc in Nanotechnology Engineering in the whole country. There is a need to create additional nano-based mainstream programs rather than supplemental nano-discipline degrees. I have a whole list of recommendations to make. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. Madame De Rosa, please.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
speak with you today, this time on the topic of nanotechnology and agriculture. I think you heard a very nice overview about the challenges relating to nanotechnology and some general, outlooks. I want to give today maybe a spotlight on the case for nanotechnology in one specific application, and that's for use in fertilizers. That's where I'm most familiar because of my research. I'm a chemistry professor at Carleton University, and I do research there. And at Carleton, we do actually have a BSc nanoscience program that we do have, as well as Guelph and Waterloo. And so I do teach in nanotechnology and research in nanotechnology as well. So my research is in the area of using DNA as a building block for nanotechnology. I'll explain what that means in a moment. But first I want to talk to you today about some ways that nanotechnology might be able to solve some of the problems surrounding the production of food. In particular, I'll focus on using nanotechnology for fertilizers or other crop inputs. In 2009, I prepared a foresight review on the use of nanotechnology in fertilizers for the CFIA's Fertilizer Safety Office, and I've also published on this topic in the journal Nature Nanotechnology in 2010. So I'm sure you're already aware through your work in this committee about the big challenges that are facing agriculture here in Canada and globally. And a major challenge will be to find ways to meet growing demands for food in an economically and environmentally sustainable way. That's a big challenge. In 2007, the Director General of the Food and Agriculture Organization of the UN made this statement. He said, "We cannot feed 6 billion people today and 9 billion in 2050 without the use of chemical fertilizers." But he said judicious use of chemical fertilizers. So note that word, judicious. We need to use fertilizers, but we have to do it in a careful way. So if fertilizers are needed for food productivity, then why do we have to worry about them? Why is there a bad reputation for fertilizers? So we know that the benefits of fertilizers can come at a cost. They come at an economic cost to farmers. They have to pay for these things. They also come at an environmental cost. We know this. So what is the main issue? Well, the main problem with fertilizers is not their use as a nutrient for crops. That's what they're for. They're to provide nutrients to help crops grow, increase crop outputs, and that we can then use that crop as our food supply. The problem with fertilizers is that they're inefficient. So I'm going to speak mostly about nitrogen fertilizers because that's what we're working with, but 50 to 70% of nitrogen fertilizer that gets applied to farmland does not actually end up as nitrogen that goes into the crop. Instead, it gets lost to water, air, stuck in the ground, these sorts of things. So all that wasted fertilizer is a big economic drain on farmers, right? About $1 billion a year for Canadian farmers. Lost, washed away. And it's an environmental problem, too. We can't deny it. That fertilizer, if it ends up in the water, it can lead to dead zones. If it ends up in the air, that's greenhouse gases, so always a problem. But it's not the fertilizer that's the problem. It's the fact that they're so inefficient. So how can we reconcile this problem? We need fertilizers to improve crop yields. But fertilizers, when they end up in the wrong place, are bad. So what do? We need to get more from less. So this is where nanotechnology might be able to help. So nanotechnology is the epitome of getting more from less. If we can improve the efficiency of fertilizers, then we can maximize gains while minimizing negative impacts. So I think you've already heard about what nanotechnology is all about. You heard a nice definition, 1 to 100 nanometers, so I won't go through that again. But it's important to note that nanoparticles, nanomaterials are different, not just because they're small, but because their properties are also very different. A lot of that has to do with surface area, but there are other electronic reasons why these things are different. So different can help and different can also hurt, so we have to keep that in mind. Okay, so let's get back to the problem. If our nutrients could access the crop more efficiently, then they wouldn't be wasted. So it turns out that plant surfaces are covered with micro and nano-sized pores. So perhaps if the fertilizer and the pores were well matched according to size, then maybe the transfer of nutrients would be more efficient. So I found examples in papers and patents where this strategy has worked. For example, there was one example where carbon nanotubes were added to hydroponic tomato seedlings. And they found that there was an increase in crop yield and tomato yield in the case where there were nanotubes present. And they postulated that had to do with the nanoparticles interacting with the seed surface, the nanopores, allowing more water and nutrients to get into the pores. So this could be the same sort of ideas that I'm mentioning. A size match allows for greater nutrients to be taken up efficiently. But Making a fertilizer into a nanoparticle may not solve all the problems, right? We need to make fertilizers not just small, but also smart. So we heard a little bit about smart materials a minute ago. I think this is really important. So an ideal fertilizer or pesticide or herbicide would respond to the needs of the crop. So how would it do that? Only deliver fertilizer when the crop needs it, for example. So it turns out that crops are constantly releasing chemical signals into the soil environment. These things are called exudates. And Dr. Carlos Monreal at Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, who's our collaborator, is working to try to decode these signals and figure out which of these messages are the crop saying, I need nutrients. With that information, he's leading our team of researchers to develop our smart fertilizer that can recognize those specific signals and respond by releasing fertilizers into the environment. So here's where our research comes in. How can we make a fertilizer recognize these signals? Well, we use a type of bio-nanotechnology called a DNA aptamer. It's just a piece of DNA, synthetic. We make it in the lab. That can fold up and interact with any target. These targets could be drugs, toxins, viruses, could be anything. So you can imagine we could find an aptamer that binds to one of these signals, and that's what we've done, and we've been working on that. So what we've done next is make these into coatings that form capsules. We could fill those capsules with drug. We could fill them with a nutrient. We're working on that. And so the wall of that capsule contains aptamers that could recognize the specific root signal. And when the plant signal comes into contact with the aptamer inside the capsule wall, the aptamer will recognize it and it would allow the film to become more porous, and then the fertilizer would be released. So in this way, the smart fertilizer would be able to understand the needs of the plant and respond, delivering fertilizer when appropriate. So we've been doing test studies, and we've been able to show that when the aptamer does bind to a correct exudate, we can get 5 times more permeability of these films. These are dye release studies. We're now moving to the greenhouse to test these on actual nitrogen fertilizers, and things are going well. We need to expand our work to work on other crop nutrients like phosphorus, potassium, micronutrients, even pesticides and herbicides, because you can imagine a crop, a plant under attack could be releasing signals to the environment in forms of defense, so this could be something we could exploit. So with our work and other examples of nanotechnology in agriculture and fertilizers, there are still many questions that need to be answered. How will these nanomaterials interact with the soil? What will be the environmental and health effects? What will these nanoparticles, what will be their fate in our food? These sorts of things. So we have years of work ahead of us. We'll need to confirm our coatings are biocompatible, biodegradable. We have to investigate new plant signals to tailor our fertilizers to different crops and maximize their efficiency. But I think this is maybe a case for nanotechnology, because I can imagine that this work and the work of others could lead to a time when farmers would be sprinkling their fertilizers onto the crop or adding a pill of fertilizer, nutrients, and pesticides and herbicides at the time of planting. So we would get more from much less. So with that, I thank you, and I welcome any questions.
Thank you, Madam. The first senator for question will be Senator Maltais, to be followed by Senator Mercer. Senator Maltais, s'il vous plaît.
Go ahead, Senator Maltais. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I will ask the doctor to put his headset in. I'll just wait till he's done. Nanotechnology is fairly new. There hasn't been a lot of experience with it, so we can't say that it goes back many years. Quebec does 39% of research in this sector, Alberta 15%, and BC 14%, and Ontario 30%. Are you aware that right now, that in Montreal, there's a Canadian Industry Association being created of nanotechnology, and it has an agricultural sector. So there's also the University of Sherbrooke, which is involved in agricultural nanotechnology, along with the CEGEP of Thetford Mines, and the McGill University, as well as the Université de Montréal, have a number of specialists who are looking at nanotechnology as a whole, but there's also an agricultural sector there as well. Ms. DeRosa, you talked a lot about fertilizers, and obviously that is very important because fertilizers are very important for fruit and vegetables. But I didn't hear you say anything about the benefits of nanotechnology in the traceability and conservation of food. The a possibility of detecting bacteria, for example. And I think that that is a science that is going to be very interesting for all Canadians, especially consumers, because apparently it allows for instantaneous detection without having to produce reports over 3 or 4 years to find out whether the meat or the potatoes are good or not. So this is an extraordinary science that is going forward thanks to researchers such as yourselves. And once that we are able to apply that, well, I mean, I'll come back with more questions later, but I'd like to hear what you have to say on what I have just spoken about.
Completely. It's a Canadian-wide effort, worldwide effort, nanotechnology, and I think Canada is a leader in terms of the research that's going on in our institutions, so we can be proud of that. Your point about going towards maybe food safety applications, it sounds like, right? Is the meat good or not, right? This is very important, and I think we're both doing this sort of research, and many people around Canada are also doing this research. And I think it speaks to the same sorts of issues that, same sorts of challenges, but you're right, there could be more of a direct impact with consumers, right? If you say you're working on a nanotechnology that's going to improve fertilizer efficiency, that may not resonate with most Canadians, except maybe farmers. But if you say you're going to make sure that we don't have to have another food recall for E. coli because your nano sensor will detect E. coli 157H7 at very low levels early on, then most Canadians will sort of appreciate that. So I think you're right, but I think these efforts are ongoing and also in parallel with the sorts of things that we're doing.
Les chercheurs, les universitaires.
Researchers and university academics with whom I've met and had discussions have raised certain important points, and I would like to know whether they coincide with yours. In particular, and I'm sure you'll agree with this, they are calling for more funding in R&D, and I've never heard of any researcher who didn't want that. So is that a problem? I'd like a brief response, please, because I think it is a problem. Well, that's what they all told me anyway.
Yes, I think it is a problem. I think that there is less research money to go around. We understand that as researchers, but there should be maybe some directed funding for these sorts of maybe high risk but high benefit applications. This is one issue that I think maybe we both agree on. I'm not sure that with nanotechnology type research, some of this stuff does sound like science fiction at first, right? So when I first pitched some of these ideas with Dr. Monreal, people think this is unbelievable that you would be able to do something like that. It's very difficult to find funding for these sorts of really out there ideas, but these are the ones that could be transformative. So I think it is a problem, the lack of research funding, but maybe more directed kind of high impact type funding would be really valuable.
Dr. Neethirajan.
Senator, the Dr. Neethirajan would like to respond as well.
Discussion part. Yes, I'm aware of the Sherbrooke University, also the Chemical Engineering Department at University of Laval, Bioresource Engineering Department, few fellow colleague faculty members at McGill University are my collaborators. We often meet in conferences and talk about various nanotechnology-related projects. If we take Guelph is basically a hub for food-related research in the whole Canada. There are about 55 key scientists working in 3 different major institutions: Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, Guelph Food Technology Centre, University of Guelph Food Engineering and Department of Food Science, detecting bacteria. My NSERC Discovery Grant is basically investigations of biofilms using microfluidic systems. So we have also developed novel technology. It's called smart surfaces, which will not allow the bacteria to attached on the surfaces. Using nano and micro technology, one can enhance the surfaces using photolithography process. There is no nanomaterial actually involved. With just surface undulation, one can repel the bacteria, and this particular surfaces can be deployed in food industries. So there is a bigger demand from the food manufacturing industries, especially in Ontario.
Okay. Les autres points qu'on
The other points that were raised during my discussions with these experts, I imagine it's the same thing. We're talking about the manufacturers because once the research has been done, the product has to be manufactured. And I was told that the challenge with this is marketing, is simply because the regulatory processes in Canada are just not up to par. They're not at the level where certification can be granted. Now, once these products have been manufactured, well, they need to be sold and they need to be accredited or approved by the government before that can happen. So how do you see that? Because it's all very well to do research on new fertilizer, but what if no one's producing them or manufacturing them? And when you were talking about the University of Guelph, Dr. Neethirajan, you said that it's the best-known university in terms of food sciences, and we have heard from many witnesses from your university, and you're right, they are exceptional researchers, and they work a great deal on the advancement of food sciences and agri-food sciences, and we need to encourage them, definitely, so that they continue to do your work. So I would just like to hear you on that, Dr. DeRosa.
I think, and again, you may or may not agree with me, I think that this is a global challenge to regulate nanomaterials. I don't think it's a Canadian problem alone, and I know that from my colleagues at, say, Environment Canada, they are working globally to try to come up with some of the answers to some of these problems. For example, what is the definition of nanotechnology? How do we name nano products? How do we regulate nano products? So I think it is a challenge for Canadians. Obviously, industry would benefit from, if not necessarily lax regulations, but clear regulations, right? I think that's what industry needs, a clear idea of what standards they need to meet, and then they will abide by them. That's the challenge right now, but it's not a Canadian problem alone. So I think, I think it's going to take, because now commerce is so global too, one of the things that I found when I was putting together my report for CFIA is that a lot of the products that are currently available that do have nanotechnology in them, they are not produced here, they are produced elsewhere, but we can bring them into Canada. So this is a global issue, right? So regulating products, this is a global issue, we need to work together.
So I think globally nothing is regulated. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Senator Mercer.
Mercer, please.
Well, thank you both for being here. I'm not going to pretend that I understand any of this technology that you've described to us, and I'm hoping that as we go through the study, I'll come out the other end with a little more knowledge. But I do understand the problem, and your comment, Professor, about quoting the United Nations. We cannot feed 6 billion people today and 9 billion people in 2050 without judicious use of chemical fertilizers, and I don't think we can get there without the use of some new technology, nanotechnology, whatever it may be called or described. But I also see a problem where in many parts of the world, in some parts of the world, the use of genetically modified organisms is a problem. And are we going to get to a point where, as we develop nanotechnology in whatever form it takes, are we going to run into those same people who are going to say, "Oh well, we don't want any of that"? I hope all of those people are paying attention when people start starving around them because they haven't given some thought to the GMOs or nanotechnology. But is there a resistance out there, or is there I don't think it's a movement, but is there some resistance to what you're doing?
Definitely, I think that similar groups who are against GMOs are also have the same sort of hesitation when it comes to nanotechnology. And one thing that nanotechnology researchers and also, even governments dealing with policy and these sorts of things, when we talk about nanotechnology, they use GMO as sort of an example, of how not to go with your technology, in the sense that it's important to at least, for the public, to show that you are on top of the technology, you are aware of the technology, you understand the technology, you are regulating the technology before the technology gets too advanced. Because I think there was maybe a little lag with GMO, and I'm not a GMO expert. And so the idea that nanotechnology will follow the same path, that the general public will reject nanotechnology because they don't think their government is on top of it, they're not paying attention, they're not taking it seriously. That's something that nanotechnology researchers and policymakers are aware of. But that's definitely a concern. It's definitely a concern. And I think, my colleague spoke to some of these things when he said that, we need to have education along with research, right? If we're teaching people about nanotechnology and people are aware of our research and that we are interested in, studying the effects and being, responsible about our research, then maybe the general public will be more accepting of it. But maybe you can speak to it as well.
It is indeed true. The lessons learned, nanotechnology researchers are looking at various case studies and different scenarios that have occurred because of the GMO reasoning. 2 years ago, European Union has already put forward regulations on how to use nanomaterials in food and agriculture 2 years ago. But only during April 2012, this year, United States Food and Drug Administration has come up with regulations and guidelines for food packaging and other related nanomaterials. The difference between European Union and the FDA is FDA regulations are predominantly voluntary. So my perspective is, if you look at a globe, European Union is more conservative in adopting the technology compared to us here in North America, both the United States and Canada.
It seems to me that we need to get ahead of this. I mean, we're at the early stages of this, and we need to try to avoid what's happened to GMO. I often wonder that when we move from 6 billion to 9 billion, if we could send those 3 billion people to those countries that are opposed to the use of GMOs, well, I think we'd solve. They may amend their ideas, but Madame De Rosa, you use the words big high risk and high benefit, but I think we need to add the other issue of a big problem.
Yeah, that's a good point.
To look at it in the context of it may be a high risk and it may be a big benefit, but we're dealing with a problem that's not going away. We've got people starving now in the world. Probably be more because of bad food distribution than we do of production. But you add 3 billion people to this planet, it's going to get a little crowded. I was in India earlier this year, and it's pretty crowded already, and it's going to get worse. So the commercialization, if one way to one way to help attract the proper money for research is to be successful, of course, and that means how do you get from your labs to something that's commercially marketable. Are there people beyond both of your universities, both good universities, that are looking at this from a pan-Canadian point of view? How do we take the nanotechnologies that are coming out of my colleague mentioned what's going on in Quebec? Are we looking at this from a national perspective, because things are going on in each area? Can we bring what's going on at Carleton and at Guelph, perhaps with the University of Sherbrooke, and maybe we're going to get somewhere? And I know there's a need for competition between researchers, because that's what drives you. Yeah. You want to get there first. But is there anybody who's saying, okay, can we bring this together?
I think it's happening at a grassroots level. You know, researchers know to pair up and to work with the best researchers to get to their goal, but I don't know that there's, from the top down, maybe you can also add to that, but I don't think there is, and maybe there should be.
There should be some sort of mechanism or a means that should be set in a national level, predominantly focusing on nanotechnology-oriented commercialization. So unless otherwise, for example, the patent we have got, it's based on nanomaterial. It's a conducting polymer which behaves in an entirely different fashion that cannot be, we can tune and tweak the sensing window based on the need we want. So the idea is we can detect the incipient spoilage of the stored food rather than once the food has completely spoiled. The moment it spoils, the sensor will be able to tell you and warn the farmer or the manager of the stored food system. But we filed the patent in the chemical engineering, chemistry background because there is no such mechanism related to nanotechnology or a particular hub that basically facilitates the nano-oriented product in the society.
Thank you, Chair.
Senator Eaton to be followed by Senator Colbeck, Senator Booth, and Senator Robichaud. Senator Eaton.
Yes, thank you both, professors. Very fascinating. There was a very good section in the Wall Street Journal, weekend edition, on food security and new ways of, I don't know if you both saw it. But how can nanotechnology be employed in the future when we have to grow so much more food? They talked about growing food, simply hanging roots in the air and spraying them, and the food would grow. So you wouldn't need pesticides or herbicides. You wouldn't need earth. Is nanotechnology involved in any of those things?
I think it could fit in still. You can imagine, aerosol droplets of the nutrients that you need, nano size, that would be in that spray. So I think, and probably nanotechnology would facilitate some of these kinds of ideas on how to grow food in very confined spaces with very limited resources. So I think it is still applicable, definitely.
Do you in any of your research think about futuristic things, or are you really doing problems that come up day to day right now?
So, there's a bit of both, right? So we have, and this was, mentioned as well, about the idea of discovery-based research, where we're just trying to, come up with the foundation for some of these things. But of course, we do blue sky kind of thinking and say, okay, where will we be in 20 years, and what are the challenges going to be then, and how can what we're doing now apply to that? Because it will take that much time for some of these ideas to become reality. So if we're not really thinking ahead, in the sense that, okay, this may be a product, 10 years from now. What's the world going to be like 10 years from now? What's agriculture going to be like 10 years from now?
Yes, and shouldn't you be kind of leading the way in agriculture? I mean, isn't there always a lead time? You can't expect farmers who work so hard, sometimes with limited cash outlay, if you're not going to, you have to allow a lead time.
Sure.
And education.
Exactly.
We always say that today's research is tomorrow's reality. There are two issues here. One is the food safety issue. So the food, instead of producing more food, if we can somehow, using nanotechnology, store the food for longer time, enhance the shelf life, then we can feed more people. The statistics says that whatever we grow, 50% is being lost during storage in China, India, and other developing nations. 50%. Here is about 9%, North America. So we are a well-developed country, but still 9% is really huge. So if we grow, instead of growing wheat kernel, if we can enhance the storage life of one particular wheat kernel, making every kernel count using nanotechnology, we can solve the food safety drastically. So we don't have to go and use more chemicals, more materials in producing more food and also using more land. Just by focusing on post-harvest storage losses, this address could be possibly solved. The second point, the question here is how you are doing research, whether you are looking in the near term or in the long term. We always focus on the long term. For example, I have a collaboration going on with a scientist at the Canadian Light Source at Saskatoon. The idea is we are looking at developing a handheld sensor imaging system. So we foresee that in another 10 years or 15 years, farmer can simply take that particular smartphone appearing device to the farm and just scan the crop. So the libraries of that particular device will automatically compare the chromosome makeup of those crop, and then based on the chromosomal aberrations and the energy makeup of those chromosomes, the device will immediately tell what is the condition of the crop. It's just like a taking picture and an immediate result based on the image analysis program.
Yeah, so I was going to ask you that. So they'll be able, eventually people will put it in their tractors or their smartphones, and just the way they can use GPSs, I guess it is, Madam Expert here, Booth, to tell how many seeds per acre. They'll be able to have those kind of apps, nanotechnology. Well, I think it's fascinating. I think you just have to go into schools and educate kids. I think you'll make your case.
So that brings us another important issue, that as a national level, as a nation, as a country, we need to step forward to create, to recommend awareness or education awareness for the high school level. At the high school itself, we need to bring the nanotechnology awareness to the students, because it is not one particular program. It is a truly multidisciplinary field. It is a combination of mathematics, physics, chemistry, engineering, and all kind of biological sciences. So once we bring the high school level, then we can generate the future generation in a much more intelligent fashion.
If you had, and there's other senators waiting to have their turn. If you had 3 priorities, not funding is not of interest to us. Sorry. If you had 3 priorities, what would they be? In terms of research, what would you want to do?
I think we've touched on it a little bit, right? So in terms of for agriculture and nano, is that what you mean?
Yeah.
Well, definitely, I think for food safety applications, we need to work on that, definitely.
And you have specific ones. Would you like to send us, would you like to put it on the record and send it to us?
Sure.
Your specific, something we might consider putting in the report.
Definitely.
Your specific recommendations.
Right. Where the research in this sort of field really needs to go.
How it could help either food diversity, traceability, or sustainability.
Okay. Well, sustainability, I think some of the things we've already spoken about will really fit in there.
Okay. Great. Thank you.
Thank you. The clerk will be sending you a copy of the question, and then you could probably respond. There was one supplement before we go to Senator Colbeck, and it's Senator Merchant. Merchant for
yes, fine is very quick, but because food safety is front and center right now with the consumers. Are you getting to a point with your technology where the consumer can have some kind of, just an analogous kind of way that when we go into a supermarket to buy things, we would be able to,
that's the goal.
I would say scan, because I don't know what word to use, but there will be some, because, you want to involve everybody. And we have to take charge of our own health and know what we are doing. So how close are we getting to where I will be able to go into the supermarket and have some way of knowing whether things are fresh, whether things are, whether there's something in them that I should avoid?
Excuse me. I think that we are getting there. I mean, I know you have, I'm sure, many examples for the things you're working on, but we're working on basically like something that would look like a pregnancy test, but for norovirus, which is Norwalk, if you've ever heard of it. This is this gastroenteritis. Excuse me. To be able to test it on your meat, basically, when you bring your meat home, test it to see if it's safe. So that's the goal.
We have color-changing packaging materials available. So you store the salad for more than 4 days. Automatically, the color changes from red to orange, just throw it away, don't use it. So packaging can be enhanced. Lots of fascinating research is going on at the University of Guelph in that particular aspect.
And there's no doubt that Senator Eaton, when she talks about Guelph, she will ask us to go visit Guelph. Senator Colbeck to be followed by Senator Booth and Senator Colbeck, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you both for coming this evening. Professor DeRosa, you ended your statement here when you said, I imagine that nanotechnology will lead to a time when farmers will be sprinkling their fertilizer into their crops or planting a small nutrient pills. How far off are we from that in your estimation?
That's a great question. And it's always hard to answer those sorts of questions. We started this 5 years ago from an idea, and now we're at the point where we're testing things in a greenhouse. So I would imagine with the same level of resources that we have right now, same number of people, that maybe, again, another 5 years from now, we would have something that could really be, we could commercialize. But with more resources, more people, it could be faster. But this is always a challenge, right? Yeah.
That brings back to the point of sustained funding, because from idea to innovation to product doesn't happen in few months, doesn't happen in few years. We need 5 to 10 years to realize a commercial successful product. So the government need to step in to provide sustained funding to encourage researchers to innovate and to invent novel products.
Something else, if I could add it. Sorry, yes. One challenge or one thing to think about, a lot of research funding now is moving more towards industrial partnerships, which is a good thing. But there are some areas where it's difficult to get funding through an industrial partnership, and you would be surprised. The idea that what we're presenting with this smart fertilizer, that it seems like automatically this would lend itself to an industrial partner, right? And we have had success finding industrial partners, but we do have to be careful because if you think about it, companies make money being inefficient, right? And this is true in all sorts of different sectors. So if we're depending on industry to help us further this product, we could run into a situation at some point where they take the technology and help patent it and then shelf it because they don't want to lose the revenues that they're getting from being inefficient. So I think it's important that we do have, we need industrial-based research, but we also need, that complementary research that's funded elsewhere.
I want to ask you about we hear, or we've heard from you tonight, a lot of advantages of using this technology in the food sector. Now, I also read somewhere where there are a lot of concerns that are emerging regarding the use and consumer safety and so on. I'd like for both of you to talk about that a little bit.
So I think, yes, you're right. Because a lot of this is new, and we've touched on this several times, we don't know all the answers yet. And we won't for some time. We don't know what the environmental and health impacts of some of these things are. And the important thing, I think, the problem maybe, is that some of the technology has gotten ahead of regulations. So in terms of nanotechnology, antibacterial, almost everything now has to do with silver nanoparticles, right? So antibacterial socks, these socks that don't smell, and all these sorts of things. People may have them in their homes, and they could be based on silver nanoparticle technology. But we don't 100% understand what happens when those silver nanoparticles are washed off those socks and end up in a lake, or if they're consumed, or these sorts of things. So definitely the drawback right now is our lack of understanding. And in the push to innovate, sometimes these questions get overlooked, and then we could end up then having to backtrack. So that is a big issue right now, I think.
Do you want to comment on that?
Sure, quickly. Consumer awareness. I believe that public and the consumer should be involved in each and every step and stage of the process, right from the idea to develop a fully functionable product. I also believe that consumers have better adoption rate if it has to do with food safety, or something nanomaterial that is not inside the food. If they have a feeling, or if they think that there is something, the food has been modified. So there is a difference between the food and the food packaging and the mechanisms and the operating processes that surrounding the food product development. So there is two different sections the way consumer perceive. So more awareness, more education towards the society is the key in addressing these challenges. That again goes back to the toxicological effect. As such, there is no global nomenclatures. If I go to a particular electronic shop, I buy a particular electronic component, so it has completely standardized. It has a certain number of pins, the power should be certain voltage, and so on and so forth. But globally, there is no nomenclature, no standard, no protocol. So there should be some mechanism. Canada could possibly play a leadership role in this particular aspect as well.
But you said earlier you think that Canada is a leader in nanotechnology, right?
Yes.
Now,
yes, I do.
Back in 2000, when President Clinton was in the States, there was a big initiative started. And that has grown by leaps and bounds, my understanding. So have we in Canada grown percentage-wise about the same, or are they way ahead of us?
Well, I think, I think we punch above our weight. In terms of, we heard a little bit about that in terms of our publications and the impact of the work that we're doing, but I think it's difficult to compare ourselves to the U.S. They do have a larger injection of funding to go with and more research-based institutions. So,
if you want the realistic statistics, I can quickly give you a statistics, but please don't feel bad or sad about it. We rank 14 out of 17 countries that is doing nanotechnology research. So this study was done on a global level by taking into account GDP and the research product output. In terms of the productivity, number of publications, we rank really high. But for the past 10 years, from 2000 to 2012, we are still in the D category compared to Finland. Finland moved from D to C in the last year, and Denmark is in B category. So we are in D and rank 14 out of 17 countries globally.
Where are the United States in that?
Number one.
Yeah, that's right.
United States, followed by Japan, China, and Korea.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Senator Colbeck. Senator Boot, to be followed by la Sénateur Robichaud. Senator Boot, please.
Thank you, Chair. And in the interest of time, I'm just going to ask you a question, and perhaps then you can just forward the answers to the clerk. You've mentioned the regulatory issues and some of the challenges with that, in terms of definitions, et cetera, and not having standards for testing. So can you give, say, a top 5 recommendations in terms of what you believe needs to be done on the regulatory side, and forward that to the clerk so we can have a sense in terms of, and try to make your comments really specific so that so it's something that we can take into consideration in terms of our final report. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And on that same point, if you could also include intellectual properties, the challenges that you have in nanotechnology with intellectual properties. Okay. Thank you, Senator Wood. Sénateur Robichaud, s'il vous plaît.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It really astounds me when I listen to the kind of discoveries you're making with your research, because you're working on a molecular scale, and that really intrigues me. But this is a practical question, Ms. DeRosa. You work especially with fertilizers, and so do you have an estimate as to how much is used per acre, for example? And if you were to use nanotechnology where the process is applied to each seed rather than across the field. Do you have any ideas?
Okay, so I don't have all the numbers here, but I mentioned that for nitrogen, for each nutrient, it's a bit different, right? But for nitrogen, what we're looking for is even a 20% improvement in the efficiency, because right now, like I said, 50 to 70% of the nitrogen is lost. Even a 20% increase in efficiency would save the farmer millions, and would improve crop outputs and these sorts of things. So in terms of like the amount per acre, these sorts of things, I don't have the numbers, but I can run that all for you and I can send it. Yeah,
it's just that we're looking, as to see just how, what we can save, where we can be most effective, and it also has a bearing on the environment and our rivers and the fish and all that stuff.
Nitrogen is a particular problem because it is so inefficient, but even if we look at phosphorus is very inefficient as well. If we're talking about herbicides, pesticides, many of those, even if 1% of the compound ends up towards its goal, that's considered high efficiency. So there's a lot of room for improvement. So there's a lot of savings that we can make, economic savings and environmental ones.
As long as we can produce that nanoparticle.
This is it. And we don't want to cause new problems, right? So this means we have to do the research, we have to determine the effects, we have to make sure that we're not solving one problem and causing another one.
Sir, you mentioned packaging, and the research has been done that, if you use certain kind of packaging, that can detect if the food is going bad. And the packaging, in this case, would it touch the food, or would it just be a sort of a marker? Because, as you were saying, if nanoparticles are not in the food itself, the consumer might accept it a lot more if it plays another role.
Mm-hmm. So the spoilage of food can be done in different ways. So if we store a food, an apple, if the apple starts spoiling, we don't have to go and touch physically to understand. It can be done by image analysis, just by taking a picture and visual appealing, or by the amount of chemical that is being released by the particular food product. So we call it biomarkers, or odor volatile metabolites. So based on the volatile changes, even tiny little molecular concentration change can be easily detected by the packaging. The packaging it's a very huge, broad domain. Modified atmospheric packaging. There are also packaging materials which enhances the shelf life. It's called semi-permeable membrane. So it will allow only certain gases to diffuse and others cannot be passed. For example, if you want to store a beer, it will allow only carbon dioxide to store inside. It will not release the carbon dioxide outside. So the different type of material behaves differently. So it could be done by physically touching the food surfaces or by non-contact method of identifying the source of the particular spoilage.
Is that technology in packaging being used extensively in other parts of the world?
Based on my understanding, there are few companies in the United States, they are already in the process of using those particular packaging materials. Predominantly, we are still in the research and development stage. I would say probably one step behind actually deploying that into the society.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Si quelqu'un d'autre.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Someone else wants to go ahead.
Dr. Neethirajan, you mentioned in closing with your remarks that you had a list of recommendations. Could you please provide the clerk with that list of recommendations on and above the questions that were asked by the senators to you?
Okay. Definitely.
Thank you very much on this. On behalf of the committee, I sincerely thank you for sharing your opinions and recommendations and your vision. And we will now, Honourable Senators, take a brief pause to prepare for the second panel. Madame De Rosa, thank you. Dr. Neethirajan, merci beaucoup. Honourable Senators, if you permit me, now we will recognize the second panel. And the second panel, Honourable Senators, is completed with starting from Henry Van Ankem, Chair of the Grain Farmers of Ontario, Monsieur Terry Daynard, Consultant Grain Farmers of Ontario, Scott Turlow, President of the Canadian Renewable Fuels Association, and also to complete, Monsieur Malcolm West, Vice President, Finance and Chief Financial Officer for Greenfield Ethanol. On this, I am being informed by the Mr. Pittman, the clerk of our committee, that Mr. Van Hankum will make the presentation, to be followed by Mr. Scott Turlow and also Mr. West. So on this, Mr. Van Ankem, please make your presentation, and thank you.
Very good. Good evening, Honourable Senators. Thank you, Chair, and members of the committee for providing Grain Farmers of Ontario the opportunity to speak to you on one of the most important topics in agriculture, innovation. My name is Henry Van Ankem. I farm near Alma, Ontario, just north of Guelph, and I am the chairman of Grain Farmers of Ontario. Grain Farmers of Ontario represents the 28,000 corn, soybean, and wheat farmers from Windsor to Hawkesbury and as far north as Thunder Bay. Our members produce over 9 million tons of grain on over 5 million acres. Our production generates $3.3 billion in farm gate receipts, results in $6 billion in economic output, and over 50,000 Canadian jobs. In the Canadian context, Ontario is the largest agricultural province with $9.3 billion in sales. In grain production, we are the third largest producing province after Alberta and Saskatchewan. I have brought Terry Daynard with me, who has had a long and successful career in our industry, both as a professor at the University of Guelph and as the head of several agricultural organizations, the most notable being his tenure as the general manager of the Ontario Corn Producers Association for 19 years. Terry completed a literature review and study for our organization a year ago on the effects of biofuels and bioproducts on the environment, crop and food prices, and world hunger. Much of the information in the study is relevant to the discussion of innovation in agriculture, most specifically the crop innovations beyond food and how they will affect our ability to feed the world. There has been much recent discussion about whether ethanol production from corn is reasonable given the growing need for food worldwide. The world's population is projected to grow, albeit at a declining relative rate, to reach a projected peak of about 9 billion by the year 2050. With diets in many countries continuing to evolve to include more meat, the demand for food ingredients, especially grains and oilseeds, is projected to grow at a rate of at least 1% per year. The statistic we are all familiar with is the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations projection that the world's food supplying capacity will have to increase by 70% between 2000 and 2050, which equates